I read a very on the ball article a day or two ago by a woman who said that she had had to leave feminism in order to support women's rights. I have banged on about this before, actually, but I totally agree with her. Feminism as it is today is not particularly supportive of born women, if at all. I would probably be a radical feminist still, were it not for the stance that they've taken on sex work. I have to depart from them there, because I see it as a choice. Well, no, I don't. I think there needs to be a clear distinction made, which they are failing to make. There are all types of sex work. There is the kind undertaken out of necessity, which is essentially voluntary. There is the kind undertaken for profit by a few high-class escorts. And then there is sex trafficking, which radical feminists confuse again and again and again with voluntary sex work. And that is one of my objections to what they're saying. Sex trafficking. Trafficking is the operative word. Involves women who did not consent to be sex workers being conned into it, being imported from other countries, locked away in, I don't know, perhaps cellars, but sort of locked away, and they are sex slaves. And every time radical feminists are now insisting that sex work is always rape. Every time someone who has been trafficked, in the real sense of trafficking, every time she has a punter, she is being raped. Which is why, one of the reasons I feel it's immensely important to differentiate between trafficking and the women who may not regard it as the world's most desirable job, but do it voluntarily. And it's also very, very important to differentiate between sex work and rape. No one who's ever been raped, including sex workers, is going to say that that was the same experience as having unpleasant sex with a man who paid. It's not the same. If you accept money, that does constitute consent, and radical feminists are arguing that it does not. If you are forced into having sex against your will, and it is not a monetary transaction or any other kind of transaction, of course that's rape. And I think it's vital to distinguish between them. So I've had to depart from radical feminism and the other extraordinary idea that they are pushing at the moment is that heterosexual intercourse is unnatural. That does beg the question of how the hell we're supposed to reproduce. I'll leave that one there. I've already banged on about my opinion of intersectional progressive feminists, who I regard as immensely regressive for assorted reasons, some of which I've talked about, i.e. the transgender agenda, which is politically an agenda. It's happened again. I'm not talking about what I intended to talk about, really. leaving feminism in order to support women's rights was, yeah, I've covered that. There are other things here. I've also lived in a separatist feminist commune, which began as a magical experience and ended as a hellish one. And I'm just uploading a video I didn't ever intend to upload, which is about my experience of COPD in the present. One of the women from Women's Land recently stopped, actually it's probably about a year ago now, stopped beside a table where I was sitting at a pavement cafe to talk about the final stages of COPD and how you drown in your own mucus. Fortunately, I already knew that. You either suffocate because air can't get in, or you drown because mucus can't get out. That's where it's at. However, I can't see it as anything other than evil to point that out to someone who has the disease. Which is extraordinary, because one of the reasons I left Women's Land was that I was accused of being evil. It would be true to say that in my time, and certainly since then, I've sent some nasty texts that I wish I could recall. On that occasion, I'd sent a text that was completely and utterly misunderstood, and I did not intend it to be interpreted in the way that it was. Unfortunately, it was passed all round Women's Land, and they reached a consensus that I had meant what they thought I meant, and that I was therefore evil for having sent it. I knew a Scottish, well actually Orcadian, lesbian who described Women's Land, how did she put it, as a lot of, not quite as polite as mentally ill. Mentally ill women confined in a small space, shaking each other up a bit. Does pretty much describe it, actually. Although it did seem, as I say, magical in the beginning, until you actually got into it. It was communist, and it was anarchist, and as I said, it was separatist, until the services of a male were required. Not, of course, the sexual services, but the electrical ones in this case. I think I have said somewhere that I got a female dog in the first instance, so that I could take her to Women's Land, because male dogs weren't allowed there, except when they were panicking because they thought some males had attempted to enter the land, and they got a guard dog which just happened to be male. Exceptions could be made, but not for pregnant women. Pregnant women were required to leave the land at 8 months, no later, just in case they gave birth to a male baby on the land. To query that was as good as treason, heresy, whatever, both. Oh, they said, those pregnant women can go elsewhere. Where? If they were desperate enough to go to Women's Land in the first place, which at that time, well, it still is, atop a freezing hill, on a freezing hilltop, with very beautiful views, but one of the coldest places you could on God's earth at that time. You've got to be desperate to go there, trust me on this one. So quite where else these pregnant women were supposed to go, I really don't know. You couldn't leave your bedding anywhere, because it wouldn't be there when you got back, because it was communal. so nobody owned anything. If your rent money was stolen, you really shouldn't complain, because everything was communal. So there was no such thing as stealing, even if the rent money was taken by an alcoholic to use in the local pubs. The same applied to unwanted passes being made. But there were house meetings, but you must not bring that up, for God's sake. I never knew whether they were pulling my leg when they talked about orgies they'd had. I hope they were orgies they'd had with the lights off, so that, nobody knew who was doing what to whom. And what was the idea of that? Oh, that nobody should feel left out. That was it, yeah. In those days, I was able to excuse myself with great rapidity if I thought I saw anything like that on the horizon. Just as I excused myself with great rapidity one Halloween when I saw a ram's skull attached to the door. This is where the fine line between witchcraft and Satanism is crossed. Feminism, which I've had to leave in order to support women's rights.